Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm so excited to have an incredible interview for you here today with someone who is from my own town, my own parish. I'm very excited to introduce her to you. Her name is Erica, and she has an incredible story of conversion. I first got to know Erica maybe a year and a half ago when I met her after Mass one day, and she told me she had just come into the church. And then I heard her give her story in our parish a few months back, and I thought, this is an interview that I want to bring to everybody because many people always want to know, how do you deal with a mixed marriage of a Catholic and a non-Catholic? And that's the situation that Erica came from. Spoiler alert, she was the non-Catholic, and we're going to hear all about her amazing story. So welcome, Erica, to the channel. I'm so thankful you are here today.
Thank you, Keith, for having me.
Absolutely. So just a little bit of a background on you. You were raised as a Lutheran right here in the great state of Iowa.
Yes, I was. And I have to say, thank you for having me here to your beautiful studio, first of all. And no one is more surprised to be here than me.
I bet.
Truly. So thank you for having me. I never thought I would be Catholic, let alone to be here telling my conversion story. So thank you for having me. Yes, I was raised here in Eastern Iowa in Cedar Rapids in a Lutheran family, specifically Missouri Synod Lutheran. I don't know if you're familiar with
it's
that
pretty
church.
Hardcore Lutheran.
It is, yeah, it is. But that's all I ever knew. That's what I grew up in. And in fact, I come from, I guess I'll say, a very long line of Protestants. My parents were both Lutheran. I have Presbyterian ancestors. My great-grandparents were Quaker. And even looking at some ancestry in my family, some of my ancestors actually founded the Baptist Church in New England. So to say that I come from a long line of Protestants is probably an understatement. But I have to say, I'm very thankful for my upbringing. I learned a lot about the Bible in the church that I grew up in. I learned a lot about God. And I learned a lot from my parents. They taught me in their own way how to love others the way that Jesus would. So I just have to say I'm very thankful for the upbringing that I had. My parents ended up sending me to a Catholic high school.
Really?
Yes. And that was truly my first exposure up close to the Catholic faith, to the church. And during that time, during my high school years, it was very formative for me. I had a great experience. I felt very welcomed, even not being Catholic. And during my time, it was Xavier High School. During my time there, I met a very special priest, and his name was Father Dustin Vu. And to describe him best would be, he's really the light of the world, salt of the earth. And he was just on fire for God and on fire for the Catholic Church. And it was so evident on how proud he was and how happy and thankful he was to be Catholic. So that was really truly my first time meeting a priest. And he probably blew my expectations out of the water on what a priest can be and should be. And he loved all of the students and really was very kind towards me. And he knew I was not Catholic and didn't treat me any differently, never pressured me, to convert or, believe anything they did necessarily. And it was almost like he saw something in me at that time that I didn't even see in myself.
That's so cool because a lot of people, usually when you hear the words, well, I went to a Catholic school or I was raised Catholic, what's coming next is going to be just a bunch of garbage about the Catholic Church. So to hear you say that even though you came from a long line of Protestants, going to a Catholic school was a positive thing for you and you met an amazing priest, that's so encouraging to hear because we all know about all the bad stories you hear about Catholic schools and about priests. And yet for you, it was something that even at that early age, maybe planted a seed or something.
If you had asked me at the time in high school, would you ever consider converting? My answer would have been no. But looking back now, I'm able to see that there were seeds being planted at that time, and the Holy Spirit even then was moving within me for my eventual conversion to the Catholic faith.
Well, we're going to get into that. But like when you were growing up, was your faith important to you? I mean, because some people come from a long line of Protestants, but it's really no different than people who say, well, I come from a long line of Catholics, but it may or may not mean that they had a personal faith or that it was really a part of their life. Was that your experience? Did you have like a personal faith growing up? I did.
It was always very important in our family. We attended church pretty much every Sunday. Sunday school was a big part, of our life. I attended confirmation classes. In our church, it would have been in 8th grade, you're confirmed. And I never really remember a time where it wasn't important. It was always, my faith was always very important and important to our family. I remember vividly going through confirmation class in the Lutheran church and something along the lines of, here's why we're not Catholic. There was, I have to say, a little bit of an anti-Catholic sentiment. Nothing hateful, but it was there. Why are we not Catholic? Why did we break away from the Catholic Church? Why did Luther break away from the Catholic Church? So I remember that. I remember going through the catechism and talking about that and talking about why we broke away from the Catholic Church.
You went through the Catholic catechism in Lutheran confirmation class?
No, it was
or the Lutheran catechism.
Luther's catechism.
Luther's catechism.
Yes.
So you probably grew up with the narrative that he was this great hero who rescued Christianity from the evil clutches of the corrupt Catholic Church. And he had this big heroic moment where he stood up and nailed those theses on the door of the church. And,
yes.
And it was this huge thing. And he set us all free to understand real biblical Christianity.
Yes.
I think a lot of people grow up with that narrative, but it's interesting. I don't know if you've dived into this with your conversion, but have you really looked back into what really happened and some of the things about Luther that maybe you weren't told in the confirmation class?
I had to. Yeah, I guess to answer your question, yes, I had to go back and study some of that.
I've wanted to do an episode at some point in time. I haven't gotten around to it yet because I really need to find an expert on this of all of the Catholic things that Luther actually believed.
Yes.
Like the perpetual virginity of Mary and different things. But then also look at some of the things that he also believed that if everyday random Lutheran people saw, they would completely freak out.
That's so true. And part of what I went back and looked at too is exactly what you just said. He had a very strong reverence towards Mary, I found out.
Oh, yeah.
I never knew that growing up. Mary was someone, and I'm sure you experienced this too, it's almost like they kind of brought her out at Christmas time, just to give birth to the Savior. And that was always talked about. But then she wasn't talked about really the rest of the year. So to find out that Luther actually had this reverence towards Mary, it was, to be honest with you, shocking to me and very interesting.
Yeah, I remember learning about that too. And, I was a Methodist growing up. And when I learned that John Wesley called Mary the ever virgin, I remember feeling the same thing. Like, wow, how come we didn't ever learn this kind of stuff? Because, I think people have their things. And it's like, well, Luther was probably still, because this is what I've heard from some people. They say, well, he was still hanging on to some vestiges of the past. And he wasn't able to quite shake it all off. We shook it all off later. And in some cases, we're still shaking it all off as Protestants. But I want to get back to your story. So when you were growing up as a Lutheran and you had your own personal faith, was there ever a moment in your life when you thought about maybe just walking away from God altogether, or were you always that was an important part of your life?
I never really had a moment where I wanted to walk away or lost my faith, but I did have these moments, more so kind of going into the college years of, where do I fit in to the faith? I was raised Lutheran. Is that how I want to follow God? Or, am I more into the non-denominational churches, evangelical type of churches? So it wasn't necessarily a matter of, but I don't want to follow God anymore. It was just, how do I want to do it? Where do I fit in to the Christian faith? And how do I want to follow God? In what tradition? In what way?
So what was that journey like for you when you got, because I imagine you go to college, you're away from your family routine of things, and did you explore different types of churches, and where did you wind up landing?
Yeah, absolutely. So ultimately in college, and I think you see this a lot on college campuses, the Salt Company, excuse me, those non-denominational evangelical churches, with the big bands and the projector screens are very attractive to college students, and they certainly were to me. It was fun. It was a fun environment to be in. I can't deny that. So that was the type of church that I found myself in throughout my college years, and there were a couple Bible studies that I was a part of, and I had a really good time. And I don't want to take away from those people or that church. I learned a lot, but I ended up kind of having this feeling of something's missing here. I didn't know what that was at the time. I felt deep down, though, that was never going to be a long-term place for me or path for me. But again, at the time, I just didn't know why.
Yeah. Now, where do you meet your husband in all of this? I feel like it was around that time, wasn't it?
It was. So we did meet in college through a mutual friend. And our first date would have been the night before Easter. It was a Saturday night. And we met up at a local coffee shop. And I remember we talked for so long and talked about so many things. We ended up essentially shutting down the coffee shop, and we were politely asked to leave at the end of the night because they were ready to close. And we talked about so much that night, and I found out that he was a Christian. But unfortunately, there was one problem. He was Catholic.
Oh!
I know.
I've been there.
So I thought, oh, shoot, this guy's really cute. I think I want to marry him. We both knew that on our first date.
You knew that? Wow.
Yes, we both did. But gosh, he's Catholic. How is this going to work? I'm sure he'll convert to my side.
So how did that come up in conversation? Like, when he told you he was Catholic, was it sort of this apologetic thing, or was he like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm Catholic"?
It was somewhere in between.
Okay.
It was somewhere in between. He's never been apologetic about it or shy about it. But the more I got to know him as we were dating, and he shared more about his Catholic upbringing, his mom was not Catholic. His dad was. And they made a decision to raise him Catholic and his sisters. So he shared more about that with me, and he went to church every single Sunday in this beautiful, small country church every Sunday, and sat in the same pew with his grandma Lucille and his grandpa Harry and his dad and his sisters every Sunday. And I found out, again, as I got to know him more, how much that meant to him and how much of an impact his grandparents, specifically his grandma, had on his faith journey. His grandma Lucille, and unfortunately, I never had the chance to meet her, she loved the rosary. That was huge to her. And she was actually his sponsor for his first communion, which I thought was really interesting. And, growing up, I didn't have a first communion, so I got to learn a little bit about that. But I remember asking him, why did you choose her, of anybody, to be your sponsor? And he said to me, without hesitation, I will never forget, she was the most faithful person I have ever met. And I realized that something special was there in his heart with his Catholic faith.
Wow. But you still were like, I need to convert this guy. Did you
well,
did you think he was really a Christian, or did you think he was just completely deceived? Or, a lot of times Protestants have various views of Catholics. Some of them think, well, yeah, they're a Christian. We're just have slight differences. Mm-hmm. Other Protestants look at Catholics sometimes and they think you don't even have the gospel. You're far gone. You just have this hollow religion, and it's my job to teach you the real gospel. Did you feel like you had to save him?
I didn't feel like I had to save him, but I think a lot of Protestants feel this way, and truly it's a misconception. that Catholics were just misguided, that they didn't really understand, that they had all these extra things in my mind.
Yeah.
When you're a Protestant, or at least, how I was raised, scripture alone, faith alone. And my perspective of the Catholic faith was, they have all these extra things that are a distraction. We don't need Mary, this reverence towards Mary, the saints, all of the sacred tradition is kind of what I misunderstood. So I never thought that he didn't have real faith or that he wasn't really a Christian, but I thought, perhaps slightly misguided.
So when you guys were starting to date and move forward in your relationship, did this come up quite a bit? Catholicism versus Protestantism, and how would you handle that as a family?
Yeah, it certainly came up, but it came up the most when we were about to get married.
Because then it's like, well, where are we going to get married, kind of a thing?
Where are we going to get married, and how are we going to be as a married couple? And I told him, I'm not converting. I'm never going to be, I probably said that. I'm never going to be Catholic.
Just so you know.
Just so you know, let's be clear. And I, again, just knowing and seeing how important his Catholic faith was to him, I was never going to ask him to leave his tradition. So there was this mutual respect, and I think our understanding would be, we'll find a mutually agreeable church. That'll be easy. It's not that different, right? You don't have to technically or formally leave your faith. I don't have to leave mine. We'll find something kind of in the middle, and life will be good. That was kind of our agreement going into marriage.
I think a lot of people try to do that, Erica. I think people think, well, we can figure out a middle ground. We'll rotate back and forth perhaps, or we'll find something we both like or whatever. But it's hard to do that. It's really impossible to do that as a Catholic, because Catholicism doesn't leave space for that kind of compromise.
Right.
And so talk to me about how he handled that.
I think all things considered, we handled it very well. But I was naive to think that that was a long-term solution. It worked for a while. So in the first couple years of our marriage, we were living in Boston, Massachusetts, and we found, I guess we did a lot of church shopping, I guess you'd call it, to a ton of different types of churches, trying to find that middle ground, trying to find something to compromise. Ultimately, we went back and forth between a Lutheran church and a Catholic church. And they were both great for their own reasons. But I remember, and mind you, this is in Boston. So these the Catholic churches are very big and they're beautiful. And I remember going to these Catholic churches, not knowing what's going on or fully understanding what was going on. But I liked being there. I liked just being in these beautiful Catholic churches, even if I didn't understand or agree with everything that was going on. I never said that out loud.
That you liked being there?
No. I never said that to him. I went, willingly with him and was happy to do so, but I never really expressed truly, I like being here. I would leave the church, though, with a ton of questions for him. Like, what did that mean? Or why did they talk about Mary so much today? Or what's the deal with the saints? I'd leave with a ton of questions, and some of them he couldn't answer, but he was always really kind in his reply. So I challenged him a little bit on what he believed and why he believed it. So again, we had many years of just kind of this back and forth between the churches. And it didn't really become, I don't want to say a problem, but I didn't really feel like I had to make a decision until we were expecting our first child. So at the end of our stay in Boston, we found out that we were expecting our first child. I was pregnant with our first son at that time. And something started to shift. It's not just going to be us anymore. We have a child to look after, not just physically, but spiritually. How are we going to raise this baby? Catholic or not? That's when it became a little bit more real for me.
So when you guys were going through this time where you're kind of bouncing back and forth, was he ever asking you questions about your faith too, or do you feel like he was more on the down low about that? Were you still, because I guess what I'm trying to get at was, were you still trying to convert him?
No. And I'm surprised by that.
Yeah?
A little bit.
Do you think that had something to do with what you were experiencing when you would go to Mass and you would have that sense of being drawn in?
Yeah. I don't think I would have said that at the time, but looking back, yes. I think the seeds were being planted there. And God was already tugging at my heart in a way. And it wasn't this bolt of lightning moment, but looking back, it was these little quiet moments along the way, kind of tugging at my heart gradually over the course of many, many years that led me here.
Were you aware of that as it was happening, or did you sort of separate the things and thought, well, I'll still never be Catholic, but I can admit that that's kind of cool?
That.
Okay. Yeah, I can relate to that. I can relate to that. Learning about Catholicism, and it's almost like you have this disclaimer that you put before anything good about the Catholic Church. Now, just so you know, I'll never be Catholic, but I think it's really beautiful in here, or I think that whatever, but I'll never, we're always hedging our bets against the idea of conversion. But what's interesting to me is how people sometimes can not be aware that we're there, and they could think, oh, she'll never let anything into her heart, or he'll never listen to anything that I'm saying. And it just goes to show that you can never judge where another person is at interiorly, because they may not be letting you know that those moments are happening to them.
That was me. I think I had a lot of pride looking back. I'm not happy to say that, but I'll be honest with you that I had a lot of pride. I was a proud Protestant.
Yeah.
I was proud of that. And to give a compliment to the Catholic Church, or to share something that I enjoyed about it or liked about, was really hard for me at that time. Absolutely.
Yeah. I think that's very interesting, because people sometimes are so surprised when someone says something good about the Catholic Church. Like, I had no idea you thought that. But when we're in that, when we're in that proud Protestant moment, I like how you put that, like, we're afraid to admit anything, because it seems like sometimes with Catholicism, there's just this, it's like a steep hill. Once you crest the top and you admit there's something good about it, there's no turning back.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's get back to this whole thing about when you're getting ready to have your son born. Yeah. What was it about? You didn't think, we need to raise this kid Lutheran. I come from a long line of Lutherans. We're not messing this up. I will not be the weakest link.
Yeah, yeah. So we moved back to Iowa at this time. And in the very early stages of my pregnancy, we were moving back to Iowa. And again, I'm thinking, how are we going to raise this baby? So we started church shopping again. Oh, we'll find something mutually agreeable for this new phase of our life. But kind of looking at the evangelical, non-denominational churches again. But what hit me, and what was important to me having a baby, was infant baptism. That was important to me.
Yeah. Well, Lutherans do that. Yeah.
Yeah, they do. So I knew that, there were a lot of churches that just do not believe in infant baptism. Now that we were going to have a baby, those were not going to be an option for me. So kind of looking again, Lutheran, Catholic. I couldn't explain it at the time, but it makes sense now. I felt an undeniable pull to just go to Mass.
Wow.
With my husband once I was expecting a baby.
What do you make of that?
It's the Holy Spirit, for sure. For sure. Again, at the time, it didn't make sense, and it completely makes sense now that this was God's plan, and I didn't understand it at the time. I remember going to Mass, and you can, as a Protestant, feel very frustrated going to Mass, not understanding what's going on, right? Not being able to always follow along. And I remember thinking, what am I doing? God, if this, I remember a prayer, God, lead me where you need me. That was my prayer. If this is your plan, please reveal it to me. Because this doesn't make sense to me.
When you start feeling this pull, what did you do? Did you follow that when you made this prayer, or did you try to resist this?
So I remember, again, just feeling this pull to go to Mass, whether I understood it or not. And just realizing that even though I didn't understand the Mass, that it was an opportunity for me to silence myself before God, because I didn't know how to participate. So when you don't know how to participate, you're silent. And something started to happen just by going consistently to Mass at this point. I was undeniably receiving the graces by just being there and silencing myself before God. It was very humbling. And I was finally able to listen to what God was trying to tell me.
Wow. That is a familiar story that I hear with a lot of people who come from that mindset of, or that experience of maybe the megachurch world kind of a thing, where there's so much going on, there's so much activity.
Yes.
And then you come into Mass and it's almost shocking, isn't it?
Yes.
How quiet it is. Because we walk into church and we're used to being greeted 30 times, and
Yes.
we're used to a countdown and a coffee shop and all these endless infomercials about programs that are coming up in the church, and all of this. It's like a vortex that wants to suck you into every aspect of the church when you go to some of these places, and you come into a Catholic church and it's almost like, wait, nobody even knows that I'm here. And I think for some people that's a bad thing, but I think for a lot of us, I know I felt this way, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Because we go, wait a minute, who's really the most important person in this room? Is it me? Should all the attention be focused on me? And in the Catholic Church, it's not that at all. The most important person in the room is Jesus.
Amen. And I echo that sentiment exactly. I realized in the midst of our church shopping, what are we really looking for here? It's not just, oh, we'll find something we agree on. What are we really looking for here? Because you could all day, for the rest of your life, look for the most dynamic preacher. You could try to find the best music, the nicest facilities, the most friendly people to greet you. And those things are all nice. But looking back, ultimately, I was searching for Jesus through the Eucharist.
Wow, that's so huge. You were searching for him in the Eucharist, and you didn't even realize that he was there, but the Holy Spirit is pulling you in there.
Yes.
It's like a beacon of light in the darkness.
Yes.
Calling you in. Now, at what point in time are you recognizing what's happening here? And when were you willing to talk about it with your husband?
It took a long time.
Because of the pride?
Yes.
Or because you weren't quite sure how to process? Did you ever think that it was just going to go away?
I think a couple of reasons why I never really was vocal about this to him, to my friends, to my family. There was a pride component, but I also thought, if I'm heading down this road of Catholicism, certainly I will run into something that will change my mind. So I'm not going to say anything, because that's not going to happen. I'm going to maybe go down this road. I might study the faith, but I'm going to run into something that will change my mind. So I might as well not say anything. And it was the opposite. The more I went down that road, the more I went to Mass, the more I wanted to keep going to Mass. And the more I studied the traditions that I misunderstood, the more I loved those traditions. So it was almost the things that I didn't understand, the things that I honestly sometimes didn't even like about the Catholic faith. Those are the things now I love probably the most.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
It's like when you learn the why behind the what, you fall in love with it.
Yes.
And one of the things that's so cool to me is that everything in the Catholic Church has meaning. And from the outside, it doesn't make sense, but it's like this weird thing where when you get inside and you look at it from the inside, now it's this beautiful, amazing thing, but you have to be on the inside sometimes to recognize it.
Absolutely.
So what was your study look? What did that look like for you? Were you a YouTube person? Are you a book person? Did you want to talk to people? What was that process like for you?
I didn't talk to people because at that point, it was a very private matter for me. So I was very much on my own with, outside of just going to Mass, reading a lot of books. So I got into the Scott Hahn books because I wanted to hear the perspective of other converts. That was important to me to understand. Are they kind of thinking what I'm thinking here? Or why did they convert? What did it for them? So Scott Hahn was huge for me. Turning on Catholic radio, I saw a bumper sticker for, I think it's 88.7.
KMMK, baby.
I love it. And I really never turned it off. And there was a program there on that radio station called to Communion with Dr. David Anders.
Yes.
And he is a convert as well. So I listened to him. So I was seeking out other conversion stories, podcasts, books, mostly is what I did.
Okay, well, I'm dying to know, what did your husband think about at some point in time, he gets into the car, Catholic radio's on, you're not turning it off, you're listening to it, you're talking about this. Tell me about the moment when you finally cracked the door to him that, okay, this is becoming a thing.
Right. In the fall of 2020, my grandmother, who I was very close with, had a stroke and was in the hospital, and it was it. We knew she was going to pass. And I had the opportunity to go and see her before she did and pray with her, sing with her. And I had the opportunity I didn't tell her goodbye. I told her, I'll see you again, Grandma. She was not Catholic, but she was Christian. And the morning when she passed, of all the places I could have gone, I went to Immaculate Conception. And I sat in the last pew, and there was a Saturday morning Mass. And again, I'm thinking, how did I end up here? I'm not Catholic at this point. My grandma is about to pass away, and I'm sitting in the back of a Catholic church. And I told my husband where I was going, and she ended up passing away that evening. 48 hours later, I was at my parents' house helping plan her funeral. And the sirens went off, and it was the derecho. Mm. We didn't know at the time what it was. I thought it was another tornado.
That's the big storm that rolled through Iowa. It was basically like a land hurricane, and it basically destroyed so much of our town, including, I know we lost every tree in our backyard. You probably lost a ton of stuff too, and so many buildings. So for people that didn't know, it was a huge, unbelievable windstorm that was so destructive.
Yeah, completely devastating. So, we came up from the basement after the storm was over. I thought it was just an ordinary storm, and it was easy to see it was not just an ordinary storm. So what would have normally taken me about 15 minutes to get from my parents' house to our home, it was usually would take about 15 minutes. It took over 2 hours with all of the trees down, the power lines down. And when I got to our house, I met my husband and our two boys. We had to walk, I think, a quarter of a mile actually to get to our house. And I remember just dropping to my knees, sobbing at the devastation. And later that day, and I will never forget where I was standing, in the midst of losing my grandmother, losing, so much property devastation to our entire town. I'll never forget where I was standing when I truly felt God whisper to me, "What are you waiting for?" Mm. And I knew in that moment that God was calling me to become Catholic.
So what did you do?
I realized, or had to think about, what was holding me back. Why hadn't I become Catholic yet? I think I was waiting for all the answers because I had a lot of questions. I was waiting for a perfect explanation to my family, which I think a lot of people probably could relate to if you're Protestant, to be able to explain that to your family, to your friends. I think I was waiting for it to all be very clear to me before I made that leap. And I realized my pride had been holding me back from really going down this path and committing to God through the Catholic Church. So something else that happened in 2020, about 8 weeks after the derecho, our oldest son woke up one morning and he was complaining about his leg hurting and he couldn't walk. And I thought, maybe he fell off his bed or maybe he, did something to it. So we kind of let it go for the day. And that evening, his knee completely swelled up. And that next morning, it was very swollen and he could not walk. So we took him to the emergency room and had, I guess I'll call it, an inconclusive ER visit. And I had maybe an idea of maybe what was going on, wasn't quite sure. And I was thinking in my mind, could it be Lyme disease? And I asked the doctor, and no, it's not that. So we had taken a photo of his knee swollen, and it was circulating, within our family and family friends. And we actually had a family friend who was in physician's assistant school at the time reach out and say, "Hey, we just studied Lyme disease. That's a symptom. You should get him tested.
Really? Wow.
You should get him tested." So we tested him for Lyme disease, and sure enough, that's what he had. Mm. And there's a lot of information out there about Lyme disease, and it's curable, it's incurable, and it's very overwhelming. So it kind of put us on this journey of healing for him. And over the course of the next several years, he had a host of symptoms outside of this leg issue that we were dealing with. And it was a really dark period for our family during this time. Earlier this year, so flash forward to 2024, we were kind of at our wits' end with Lyme disease and had tried several things and weren't getting the results. So we were referred to a doctor, a specialist up in Wisconsin, in La Crosse. And ever since I started having an interest in the Catholic Church, I was kind of drawn to this Our Lady of Guadalupe image and the story without really any reason. I mean, I think it's a beautiful image and very powerful story. And there happens to be near this doctor's office where we were going, the National Shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So I thought, this is meant to be, and we've got to go, not only to the doctor, but to the shrine of Our Lady of Guadalupe. So we did a couple of days at the doctor's office of treatment. But before any of the treatment, we took our son to the shrine.
This is 2024.
2024 now.
Okay.
And of course, it's beautiful, stunning, an amazing setting. And we actually went to Mass there with him before any treatment. And I remember sitting there thinking, he's going to be okay. I had this feeling sitting in that church that he was going to be okay. I don't know how. And he was so interested in just going around the perimeter of the church and reading about all the saints that are there. And I, again, just remember thinking or feeling, how did I end up here at a shrine for Mary? If you would have invited me to do this several years ago, I would have just probably stayed in the car. And here I am wanting to be here and wanting to take my son here with my husband, having a great time and loving every moment of it. So we got to go to Mass there, did a couple days of treatment, and I'm just thrilled to say now that he has been healing before our eyes.
When you think about in Catholicism, your kids and entrusting them to Jesus' mother, that's something powerful, isn't it?
It is. It is. So I know we were absolutely referred to the right doctor at the right time, but I also believe there was a special healing being at that shrine and asking for Mary's intercession. And I truly believe he is healed because of our Catholic faith.
Now, you mentioned before that when your first child was about to be born, you were considering the whole infant baptism thing, but now at 2020, you've got 2 kids now.
Yes.
What did you end up doing to resolve that?
Yes. So, of course, we knew we wanted to baptize our children. And at this point, as I shared, I was feeling a pull towards Catholicism. So ultimately, we made the decision to baptize both of our sons in the Catholic Church.
Really?
Yes.
How did your family handle that?
I think it was surprising because here I was, someone who had all these questions over the years about Catholicism. And here, flash forward, I'm baptizing both of our children into this faith tradition. And I remember with our first son, I felt very confident in baptizing him. And I felt good about baptizing him in the Catholic Church. And it was a really happy time. But at the same time, I was very conflicted because here I was committing my child to a faith tradition that I wasn't even committed to myself.
Wow.
That was hard. So I felt happy and good, confident for him, for our son. But where did I fit in to all of this? Was I going to be okay with being on the perimeter of our son being Catholic, and then both of our boys eventually, and my husband being Catholic? Was I okay with that? I had to think about that and reflect on that and pray about it.
So obviously you baptized both of your boys Catholic.
Yes.
It's probably pretty obvious to other people that maybe you're starting to make this move, but it took that moment of that just desperation there at your house after the storm did so much devastation. God says, "What are you waiting for?" And now it's time to move forward. What was that process like for you once you were at that point where you're like, "I'm doing this"?
Yeah, I realized other people may not understand this. Frankly, I don't even understand it fully. But I'm going to have to answer for this someday. Me. And I feel God pulling me in this direction clearly. If I don't say yes to this, I'm going to have to answer for that someday. And that gave me all the confidence in the world to move forward and to make a decision to be Catholic. I'm the type of person that I feel like I've got to have all the answers before I make a decision. Study, research, does everything line up before I make a move on something, which was very clear with how I was handling this. However, I didn't have all the answers. I decided to become Catholic without all of the answers, which was really different for me. But I knew, and I ended up finding out this was true, if you say yes to God, and maybe you don't have all the answers, but if you say yes, He will provide the answers to you. And that is what He did for me. It became more and more clear once I said yes.
Isn't that amazing that when we walk by faith and not by sight, it's like the light shines right where we need it to be. And then when we look back, it's still there. Mm-hmm. It's just the next step sometimes in front of us that we have to trust Him in order to see what that is. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So did you jump into RCIA? Did you show up at the church the next day and say, okay, sign me up. What do I do here? How does this work? I'm a Lutheran, but I'm ready to make the move. Or what was the mechanics of that?
Yeah. So again, I dug into my books. I dug into my podcast. But then I decided I should probably involve someone in this. So there was one morning, I went to Mass and I ran into an old friend. I tapped her on the shoulder and she said, I was just praying for you. It was it was a church I don't normally go to. And she was there and I tapped her on the shoulder. She was surprised to see me and she said, I was just praying for you. After Mass, she said, I want you to meet Father Aaron Jungi. So she introduced me to him and I knew I needed a priest to talk about the next steps here. I was pretty confident on probably what I wanted to do, but I didn't know how to do it or the formality of it. So she introduced me to Father Aaron and I was able to set up a meeting with him in person to tell him, kind of fill him in on where I was coming from, the questions I had. I'm considering converting. What does that look like? But I still have all these questions. And he was so loving towards me in his reply. He met me exactly where I was, no judgment. And I pray that anybody who is considering converting could have a priest like that.
Yeah, he's awesome.
He's awesome. So I was able to work with him directly prior to, the Easter Vigil.
So you didn't go through like a formal RCIA class?
I did not.
Okay. I didn't either.
I did not.
I didn't either. So what was it like for you when you finally got to receive your sacrament? And when before I get to that though,
yeah,
I don't know. I'm kind of hung up on this thing with your husband. Like, how did he treat you in that?
Yeah.
Was he like, ha, finally, after all these years, we knew you were going to do this,
right.
or how did he handle that?
So it's kind of funny. We were on a road trip and the boys had fallen asleep in the back seat. So we had an opportunity to talk. And I felt it kind of bubbling up inside. I think I'm going to tell him, I can't believe I really haven't yet. So I told him, like, I've got something I want to share with you. I want to be Catholic. And I think he was very surprised. I probably shouldn't have told him that while he was driving. And don't judge him for this, but he laughed.
I don't judge him at all for it.
He laughed. I don't think he believed me, to be honest.
He thought you were just messing with him?
Oh, yeah. That should tell you how much I kind of kept him in the dark.
Even after all the stuff that was going on, he still, when you finally told him, he was like, this can't be real.
I'm a very strong-willed person. So I guess one thing I haven't really shared was he never asked me to convert. He never pressured me to convert. And I asked him, why didn't you ever ask me to convert or, kind of push me in that direction? He said, I knew that wouldn't have worked for you.
You would have almost dug in your heels a little bit more to say, well, I'm not doing that because
right.
I don't want to be wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
So he kind of laughed when I told him, like, yeah, right. And I explained to him the journey I was on and what I had been studying. And looking back, I'm not thrilled that I didn't let him in a little bit more on all of this. But again, as I shared earlier, I didn't think this is something I was actually going to do. I thought the more I studied, it would come to a screeching halt and I would turn around and I would never convert. So that's why I never said anything.
Sure.
But anyway, he was surprised, but very excited and very supportive.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you go through this process. What was it like telling your family?
It required a couple different meetings or conversations with them because they were, I didn't let them in on the process of this. Sure, they saw us baptize our children in the Catholic Church, so maybe there was a thought of that could be coming, but my mom was really surprised, but ultimately very supportive. But we had to have some tough conversations.
Did they grill you about things in the Catholic Church? Were they like, well, what about this and what about that? And did you feel like you had to defend the church and all of these things?
There was a little bit of that. Nothing mean-spirited, but just honest questions that I had. But what I ultimately shared with them was, I don't have all the answers. I don't. But I'm excited to find out. This is where God is calling me. I don't know why, but this is where I'm being led. This is where I'm being called. And I don't have all of the answers, but I know someday that this will all make sense. That is what I shared with them, because I wasn't going to sit there and have all the answers. And I didn't want to make it seem like I did. I didn't. I still had a lot of questions, but I had to say yes, and I had to figure out the answers to those questions. And slowly they've been, the truth has been revealed to me.
That's awesome. Figuring out those answers on the inside. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes people are afraid to take those steps because it feels like, very similar to your story, well, I'm sure there's going to be something that's going to derail this at one point or another. So it's just a matter of time.
Right. And something else.
It never happens.
Right. Something else I shared with my mom was, I don't know why, but I feel called to help other Catholics. Being a Protestant gives you, or now, former Protestant or convert, it really gives you a unique perspective when you enter the Catholic Church. And I remember sharing with her, I really feel called in some way to help other Catholics. And I just know that this will make sense at some point. So ultimately, my parents were supportive of it, but it did require, some conversation. Yeah. It's not easy. It's just not easy.
It's tough. People for some reason, to become Catholic, it's not like anything else. If you said, oh, we're going to the First Church of the whatever or the local mega church, everyone's like, oh, that's fine. But when you say, oh, I'm going to be Catholic, it's almost like you've changed universes on people.
It's true.
And they have to understand, are you still okay? Are you still a Christian? Do you still love Jesus? Do you still believe the gospel? All of these things. But
Right.
so when you were in that process, was there anything in particular that you struggled the most with?
Mary was big. I did not understand her role. I did not understand why Catholics had so much reverence towards her. To me, I thought, yes, she gave birth to Jesus, and that was it. That was important, but I didn't understand truly her role, and why Catholics, again, had so much reverence towards her. Also, just sacred tradition and the authority of the church were huge obstacles for me. But again, the more I studied the traditions, the more I fell in love with them. And from my Protestant perspective, I thought, all of those things, Mary, all of the traditions that they have, were distractions from Jesus. That was my Protestant perspective. My Catholic perspective now is all of those things have actually brought me closer to Jesus. The complete opposite of what I thought.
I'm thinking of, Patrick Madrid's book called Surprised by Truth. And that's kind of what you're describing.
Yeah.
When you dig into this truth, you don't expect these things that are obstacles to become features. They become wow. And that's something I hear from so many people who come into the church. It's almost like we've been conditioned to have those things hidden from us. And when the light goes on those things, it's powerful. Some people become Catholic and they're always looking for ways that they can connect their Catholic faith to Protestant faith, and then other people become Catholic and it's like you see, you don't need to try to do that. You just need to let it be what it is and not try to turn it into something that you can make it easy to not be,
right,
anymore, but just jump right in. And the more you do that, the more the lights go on.
Yes.
And you can't unsee what you've seen.
It's true. And I thought, during my studies of Mary and studying the sacred traditions, I thought, why wouldn't I want these things to be a part of my faith life? Why wouldn't I want that? And I'm not saying they're true because I believe them. I believe them now because they're true. What I have to say to any Protestant questioning these very things that I was questioning, especially on Mary, and it surprised me, she only wants to bring you closer to Jesus. She's not a distraction. She's not something extra, that the Catholic faith just threw in there. She truly, even from my experience, can and wants to bring you closer to Jesus.
Yeah, she's a shortcut. She's not a distraction.
I love that.
And I think that's huge. Okay, so tell us what it was like for you when you finally had that moment. Did you come in on the Easter Vigil or did you come in? Okay, so what, 2021 or?
2022.
2022.
Yeah,
okay.
2022.
So you finally come in. So this is a long journey. It wasn't like you just woke up and was like, okay, I'm doing this. And then 10 minutes later, you're in the church. You went through this journey. What was it like to finally get to what maybe you thought was the end of the journey, but you probably realized is just the beginning of a new one?
Perfectly said. Perfectly said. So the night of the vigil, my husband and I had a little bit of time to spend together prior to the vigil. And he handed me a card. And it said, "Thank you for giving this gift to our family."
Wow.
I didn't know how much that meant to him for me to come into the faith with him and to have our family united in that way. So it was a night before Easter, of course. And that was the exact night that we had our first date, the night before Easter.
Wow. That's so awesome.
So in that card, he thanked me for this gift that I'm giving our family now of entering the church. And he gave me a box. And inside that box was his grandma's rosary. His grandma Lucille's rosary.
The one who was his sponsor.
Yes. And now he was my sponsor as well. So he gave me his grandma's rosary, and he has a very large family. His dad is one of 12 children, big Catholic family. So to have a family heirloom like that is a really, really special thing. So he had reached out to his entire family. Erica's becoming Catholic. I'd like to give her a rosary of Grandma Lucille's, and his aunt was kind enough to send it to him and give it to me. And so touching. And I think of all of the prayers she must have said on that rosary for him, maybe for me. Again, I never met her. But I feel she prayed for me. I really do. And for him and his future family. And I can honestly say that without her, without his Grandma Lucille, and the impact she had on his faith, I wouldn't be sitting here, and I would not be Catholic.
You said earlier you never met her, but I guarantee you she was praying for you and is praying for you.
Yeah. Thank you.
That's so powerful.
Thank you.
Wow. So what did it feel like when you finally got to that point?
Yeah. So the Easter Vigil, of course, was beautiful. Unlike anything I had ever experienced.
Is that the first one you'd ever been to before?
First one. Oh, man. Yeah. So beautiful. So reverent. Can't even quite describe it. So it all came down to the Eucharist. I mean, to receive that at the Easter Vigil was just beyond what I could describe. And I remember afterwards people coming up to me saying, "Welcome home." And to hear that, I thought, I am home. This feels like home to me.
I love that. That's so amazing. So what's your favorite thing about being Catholic?
I love the community. I have met so many amazing people so far, both cradle Catholics and converts. And I've just felt really, really welcome in the church. But most of all, I love the sacraments. I love the Eucharist and knowing that Jesus is truly present there. And surprisingly, coming from being a Protestant, I really love confession. I find it very healing. I love Eucharistic adoration, just the peace that you find going there, and you can show up and you don't have to do anything. Just show up and be there and know that God is working with you being at adoration.
Well, that makes sense because you talked about when you were being drawn to the Mass or being drawn to go to a Catholic church, you weren't just being drawn to a building. You were being drawn to the person who's in the building.
Yes.
You might have not been aware of it at the time, but the reason why you felt, and I think this is true for a lot of people, there's something they can't explain about it. They don't understand, but they're just like, I feel peace here. I feel like I want to be here for some reason. And they don't want to say, well, it's because of, the Eucharist. They might not even understand that, but it is.
You're right. And I didn't understand that before being Catholic. Now I understand what it was. You're right. It was Jesus.
Which makes adoration even more meaningful because you can prepare yourself for that and you can drink it in fully. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just love all of the beautiful prayers that the church has to offer. And I love the rosary. And now that I have my husband's grandmother's rosary, I love it. And it's something now that he's really getting into. He's in a men's rosary group. And we're also teaching our boys about the rosary as well. So, I mean, I could go on, but those are the things I love the most.
And I could ask you this question in 6 months, and you'll have additional things too, because that's what it's like being Catholic. There's always new things to learn and new things to experience, and you can see people's eyes light up, and they're like, "Oh, did you find out about this? Did you know about this?" It's so cool. But some of those things, like confession or the sacraments, the liturgy. I mean, you were Lutheran, but I remember as kind of a more evangelical side of things, I hated liturgical worship in the setting I came from. I wanted it to be free flowing. I wanted it to be exciting and fun and everything. And now I absolutely am in love with the liturgy. And it's like the Lord has just changed my heart so much, because now I understand what it's all about. Before, I thought it was just human preferences. Some people like it this way, some people like it that way. But now that I've been able to understand the why behind the what, like we talked about, it just makes so much sense. And that's what it's like for us, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
I talk a lot about how Jesus' parable of the treasure hidden in the field that's a critical part of my story. And because I feel like I can relate to that as a Catholic. It's like you dig up this treasure.
Yes.
And you just start to sort through it. And every piece of it, you could just spend forever examining it and appreciating it. But then you look down and there's more. It's a well. It's a well of beauty and of truth, and it's so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm with you. I truly feel like I've struck gold, but it took work, and I think people need to understand that it's not always just this bolt of lightning. It can be a slow and steady process, conversion, and that's okay. But it does take work too.
Well, that treasure is not sitting on top of the field.
Right. You got to dig.
Buried. You got to dig for it.
You got to dig. And I took a long time to dig, but I got there.
Yeah.
And it's been totally worth it.
Praise the Lord.
Totally
Praise
worth it.
Well, I have a couple other questions for you. One of them is from our local supporters and our patrons get the opportunity to ask our guests questions. And this question comes from Gayla, who says, "I'm at a loss on how to get them," meaning I think family members, "going to Mass and teaching grandsons about God. I pray every day and show by example. Do you have any advice on this matter? How can you get your family members who, like you, weren't Catholic, how can you get them to go to church?"
Keep inviting them. Do not be shy to invite them. And they might say no time and time again. Wait for that yes. Keep inviting them. Keep praying for them. Keep leading by example. When they're in your home, that's a great opportunity to share your faith with them too, through praying before meals. Keep inviting them.
So lead a good example for them when they come to see you.
Yes.
And then I love it.
Yeah.
And I would also say too, and I think you said this, be persistent in that invitation. And I'm thinking about your story, how you were experiencing this draw, but you weren't necessarily giving any indication to the people who were inviting you. So don't be discouraged, right? Because you never know when that person's going to turn to you on a car ride and say, "I think I want to become Catholic."
Right.
That's okay. Well, I have a couple other questions here. I call these my most important questions. And I ask these to all my guests because I love to hear the different perspectives. And the first one is this: what is the most important thing for someone who is considering Catholicism?
Go to Mass. That's where it started with me, is this consistent, I felt pulled to go to Mass. But even if you don't, I think you should still go, because you can learn a lot, and the graces you receive by just being there can change you.
That's a great answer. It's so opposite too of what people think, because people think sometimes that, well, if I don't get anything out of it, or it doesn't speak to me, or whatever, or I didn't learn anything, or I didn't like the music, or whatever. But we understand that there's a grace that's tangible, that isn't about what's going on in your heart.
Yes.
It's objectively there because Christ is objectively present. That's such a foreign thing to people who aren't Catholic, because we're used to going into these environments and having to manufacture this emotional state to where we can enter into worship or whatever. And so much of that experience is designed to create that experience, to create that state of, I just feel, and I remember thinking so many times, I just didn't get anything out of church. I just, or coming in, you can see it on people's faces. I remember when I was a pastor, they'd come in, they're just like, well, I'm checked out. It's not, I'm having a bad day or whatever. But in the Catholic Church, if you just go to Mass, even if you are having a bad day, now we're not advocating for anybody to not engage, but even just being there. My friend put it to me like this one time, because I was asking about adoration. I said, what do I do? What if I don't know what to do? He said, just imagine that you are there receiving a spiritual blood transfusion. All you have to do is lay there.
Yeah.
When you're getting a blood transfusion, you are literally just receiving that. And going to Mass, what I'm hearing in your story, Erica, is you just put yourself in the path of that grace, and God did that work.
Amen. That's true.
So that's great advice. So if you're considering Catholicism, just start going to Mass. Okay. Number 2 question of the most important questions. What is the most important thing for a new convert? Something that they should know or do.
Yeah. To realize when you are received into the church, that's not the finish line. That's the start. Keep going, keep digging, and share that treasure with everyone you can. There's somebody out there that needs to hear your story. So keep sharing it. Don't be afraid to share your story. Share that you're a new Catholic. Share that you're a convert, because you might share that with somebody who needs to hear it, whether it's a non-Catholic or a cradle Catholic that needs, re-energized in the faith.
Have you had people say to you things like, oh, we love you converts. You're so on fire for the faith.
I have heard that.
Yeah.
I think we had to choose this, right?
That's right.
We weren't born into this. And I think sometimes the familiar, when something's familiar, you might take it for granted. For us, it's something we had to choose on our own, through the Holy Spirit, of course. But I have heard that. But I think that opportunity is there for cradle Catholics too, if they want to be on fire. Because I don't think conversion is just for me or just for non-Catholics. I think conversion can be and should be for everyone, whether you're a cradle Catholic or non-Catholic. It's constant. It's a lifelong process. It's not just a one-time thing.
Amen. We convert every day.
We do.
To take up your cross and follow Jesus is, in essence, a moment-by-moment conversion.
Yes.
Because God is always drawing us into a greater level of obedience, a greater level of faith, and a greater level of relationship with Him. And that is, in essence, a conversion. We have these big moments where we can put these flags in the ground and say, okay, this is when I became Catholic. This is when I said yes to that. But I love what you said about recognizing for new converts that you're not done. This isn't the end. This is just the beginning.
Yes.
When you were growing up as a Lutheran and you went through confirmation or whatever, was that like in junior high school, something like that probably?
Yes, it was.
Did you have a lot of kids in your class who went through confirmation and then they never came back?
Yeah.
We had the same thing in the Methodist Church, and that's why we would sometimes, as a way to maybe console ourselves, we would joke about it. We would call it confirmation/graduation because it was almost like people graduated from their faith, which was tragic. But in the Catholic Church, that should never be a thing because there's so much that you're just beginning.
Absolutely.
Awesome. I love that. Absolutely. So if you're thinking about Catholicism, get to Mass. If you're a new convert, then share with other people and recognize that you're just beginning.
Yes.
Say something now. The last question is for those cradle Catholics who look at people like you and go, oh, it's so great to have you here. What do they need to know? What's the most important thing you would say to them?
I would encourage cradle Catholics to study, why do you believe what you believe? That's what I had to do in my conversion process, to understand why Catholics believe what they believe. And I would encourage cradle Catholics to do the same. Really dig into the church teachings of why do we believe what we believe. And I think your faith will grow because of that.
That's amazing. So were there any cradle Catholics besides your husband that helped you in this process? I mean, we had Father Aaron, we had your husband. What about, were there any other people that were playing a big role in that?
There were. And I guess I just want to come back to Father Vu on this one. When our second son was born and we were still in the hospital at this time, I was holding the baby and I heard a knock at the door. And I said, come in. And sure enough, it was Father Vu. And he was there to surprise us and congratulate us on the baby, but most of all, to pray for our son and to give him a blessing. And I'll never forget the prayer that he prayed over our son. He asked God to bring good and faithful people into his life. And I just love that prayer so much. And I realized at that moment that that's what God had done for me. He has brought and continues to bring really good and faithful people into my life. And I pray that as a parent, and I hope every parent gets to pray that for their child.
See, that's something I think that cradle Catholics often, they underestimate how much good they can do for people just by being loving and encouraging and living out their Catholic faith in front of other people. You know, we converts, we can all look toward those times when someone did that and it was so amazing. And I wonder, all these years before, you know, you were in Catholic school with him, these years later, I wonder what that was like for him to do that. And then I wonder what it was like for him to find out you were Catholic. Because when did you tell him? How did he come to know that?
Yeah. So I ended up sending him a message telling him, Father Vu, I'm becoming Catholic. And this was right before the Easter Vigil. And I remember his reply to me. It was kind of funny. I think it was OMG at first. And he said, thank you for saying yes. Thank you for being open to this. And this affirms my priesthood.
Wow. This affirms my priesthood. All those years earlier when he was planting the seeds, or God was planting the seeds through him, not only did he get to come and pray over your son, but to hear that, oh man, what a blessing. I'm sure that was a huge blessing for him.
It was a blessing to me, honestly.
That's so cool. I want to encourage everybody to never give up. You know, when people are talking to their Protestant friends about Catholicism and they think this person's never going to get it, they'll never understand, they don't care, you can never, ever give up. And I'm sure your husband could talk all about that, and Father Vu as well. That's so amazing.
Absolutely. Never give up on the people you love.
Amen. Erica, I'm so thankful for you coming to take time to share with our audience your journey and your experience. And I know that it's going to help a lot of people. When you think about where you are today versus where you were that night that you sat across from your husband and thought to yourself, well, I really like this guy, but dang it, he's Catholic and I'll never become Catholic. If you could go back in time and say something to that Erica sitting at that diner or that coffee shop, what would you say to her?
Never say never. And be open. And I think I was. In the grand scheme of things, open to what God was trying to show me, even though it took a long time. I wouldn't change a thing. It took longer than maybe it should, but this was God's plan, and I'm really pleased with how it all came together.
Well, I guarantee you he is too.
Thank you.
Praise the Lord.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for taking time to join us here today.
Thank you.
It's been so much fun talking with you and learning more about your story, and I guarantee you that this is going to help so many people out there.
Thank you, Keith, for having me.
Well, friends, I want to thank you so much for once again joining me for another episode of Catholic Feedback. If you would like to be able to ask our guests questions, because I've got some incredible guests coming up too, become a local supporter or join Patreon. There's a link in the description to that where you can participate in that. You can support the show and get your questions answered and interact with us and have a great time with all of that. And I want everybody to think about something Erica said with regard to understanding that even when you don't know what everything means fully, that should never stand in the way of taking that next step for the Lord, because God wants to reveal those things to each of you, whether you're a cradle Catholic, whether you're a new convert, or someone just considering Catholicism. God's got some incredible truths for each of you. And I want to thank you for taking time for watching this interview, and I hope to see you back next time for another great interview. Take care, everybody, and God bless.